The topic today is the law. And that's what brings us all together. We come from all different denominations, and we have all sorts of strange ideas if you happen to belong to another denomination. But the one thing that we can look at and we can all agree on is God's law. Now, I got saved 28th of April, 1965, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in the green rocking chair of the front porch of my house. And I'd been an atheist for the longest kind of time. And it's real interesting being on the outside looking in. I figured that you're either an atheist or you're born again, practicing Christian, It's just that simple. I thought that all Christians were alike. Well, I turned my life over to the Lord on that day, and I found that all Christians aren't alike. There are many different kinds of Christians as there are hind soup. And I really didn't know what to do, What do you do after you become a Christian? I didn't know anything about churches. I wouldn't talk to any preachers. Didn't know any Christians that I respected. So I figured that if I were a God, now catch this, if I were a God, I'd leave a list of rules around for somebody to follow. And I thought on that a day or two, and I said, I know. I bet you that's what the Bible's all about. So I got the Bible and started studying the Bible. And I ran into all sorts of things, I'll declare. That's one of the most interesting books, once you get into it. I ran into this thing, it said I had to get right with my enemies. Well, good Lord, isn't that an awful way to get started? Have to get right with your enemies? I had a list that long, I'll declare, And, besides that, it's humiliating. But anyway, that's what the scripture said. And as I'd run across these things, I started making notes. And later on, I put them all on my computer. And I got a computer now just loaded down. All you have to do is ask a question. I hit a button and out it starts spouting all sorts of stuff that you don't want to hear, But this is what it said about enemies. And now catch this. Thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people. Leviticus 19:18. Now, some of those people, you see, I had seriously considered taking a gun and going after. But this tells me I'm not supposed to do any of those things. And then it goes on to say, hey, I ran across something else too. I ran across the fact that in portions of the Bible, they were quoting other books that were not in the Bible. And that really, really foxed me, I figured if the prophets would quote other books that weren't in the Bible, well, then I ought to read those. So I went out and got those books. The book of Enoch, the book of Joshua, all these other books. And it was a whole lot of fun reading those things because it all dovetails together. It just helps to further understanding. It goes on. Here's the book of Enoch. Book 50, verse 4 and 5. Endure for the sake of the Lord, because the Lord will be your avenger, that there be no avenging here among men. The word man translates out as Adam. To blush rosy, to blush red. And then we go on again. Enoch 50. He who vents anger on any man without injury, the Lord's great anger will cut him down. He who spits on the face of man reproachfully will be cut down at the Lord's great judgment. Blessed is the man who does not direct his heart with malice against any man. Now, I'm reading this right now because it's got an application later on. It doesn't go away just because I'm mad at you. Doesn't mean that this just applies to this relationship. It applies to every relationship you have with man. Now, the reason we have these rules and these laws and these requirements is Solomon 14. The portion and the inheritance of God is Israel. Excuse me, that comes from Psalms. He showeth his word unto Jacob. his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. He hath not dealt so with any nation. Nobody else except us have the law. I will place my law in your hearts. I will be your God, and you will be my people. And God has not done that with anyone else. He has given us a name. Our name is Israel, to rule for God, to rule as God. Whenever you get a couple of tribes fighting in Africa and people are getting killed left and right, whose fault is it? It's your fault and my fault. We're supposed to rule that situation. We're supposed to keep peace and tranquility. And to turn them loose to go crazy is a violation of the law. Everything we do is regulated by law. Now, I didn't know this. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to raise my hand. I was told if you were insulted, well, you took your insult to the person who insulted you, and you got satisfaction. And that was a school I was brought up under. And this tells me something entirely different. Now, I looked around the churches in Lynchburg, Virginia. That's where I live, Lynchburg. And I started going to churches because that was one of the agreements I made with God. I said, I'm not going to say I'm going to believe in God, because I really don't. But I'll try, and I'll even go to church on Sunday, you know. And that last part I just tacked on. But once you make these promises, you got to go through with it, see. And that was kind of a hard road to hoe, going to the churches. And I found that these churches, I didn't go to any two of them that were the same. Each one taught something different. And, you know, that was real strange. And I was wondering if the Lynchburg churches, they must be different from the churches in Richmond or Roanoke, someplace else, see? It just must be well, I found out, talking to other people, the churches are that way all over. Well, I really got into the Bible and to the laws if I was going to find out what God really wanted, because goodness sakes, most of the churches in Lynchburg sure didn't tell you anything, nothing at all. I ended up at a place called Thomas Road Baptist Church. Had a young enterprising preacher, you know, who was coming along, and I could kind of tell that boy was going to make good, you know, because he was in there trying real hard. And it was real small when I started going there. And I went there because he used to read in the Bible. I mean, read the laws, read them right down, 1, 2, 3. And I liked that because, you know, I didn't know anything about it. And I went there 18 years. And, while I was there, I forgot to tell you, when I got saved, I was a drunk. And I mean, not a social drinker, a casual drinker. I was a drunk. And I don't think I can elaborate on it any more than say that if I didn't get a drink at a certain time during the day, I was going to get a drink if I had to kick the door down to get it. Now, I didn't start out to be a drunk. I mean, you know, I was just a social drinker. Genuine gentlemen are not drunks, and they don't kick up and carry on at parties, and I never did, even when I was a drunk. And besides, I never liked parties. I just liked the drinking that went along with the parties. And it came on gradually, you know. I don't think I ever had anything to drink till I was 18, because I promised my mother I'd never have a drink till I was 18. That was it. The day I was 18, I took my first drink. And I didn't see anything wrong with it. And many is the time I went to Thomas Road, smashed. And I didn't see anything wrong with it. And Jerry would get up there and he'd preach against drinking, see? And I used to say, I wish he'd quit, you know, meddling in other people's business, get along with preaching. So I started getting in the Bible and trying to dig out what it says about this drinking business. And, you know, I found right smart. It's right smart in there about drinking. All right, now, if we are under law, we're supposed to go by the law. It doesn't mean this is for somebody else. It meant this is for Dick Hoskins. And it's got real personal because this drinking thing I was sort of hung up on, see? And I'd been doing it for a great long time. And this came from Deuteronomy 29:6. Ye have not drunk wine or strong drink, that ye might know that I am the Lord. Ye have not drunk wine or strong drink, that you might know that I am the Lord. In other words, they're saying, if you do drink wine, a strong drink, you might not know that he's the Lord. Well, you know, I said, gee whiz. You mean drinking prevents you from knowing the Lord? Well, I reckon that's what it must say there. And then it goes on, Deuteronomy 19 and 20. And it comes to pass, when he heareth the words of this curse, that he bless himself in his heart, saying, I shall have peace, though I add drunkenness to thirst. The Lord will not spare him, and all the curses that are written in this book shall lie upon him. All the curses in this book, boy, I read, you know, there are right many shall lie on him just because he gets smashed on occasion. I mean, you talk about a party pooper, you know. And besides that, he just didn't understand I had to have a drink on occasion, like every day after work and after supper and before bed and the first thing in the morning. And then I went on and it said this, woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that putteth thy bottle to him, and maketh him drunken also. Habakkuk 2:15. That means if some of my buddies come over to the house, and I put the bottle up there and give him a drink, woe be unto him. That's what that means. That means that I'm not supposed to drink myself, but I'm not supposed to give it to anybody else. It also means that my daughters, when they come to me, Dick Hoskins, say, hey, Dad, can I work up there at the country club? The pay is just real good, you know. I said, sugar, you got to hand out drinks? And they say, yes, Daddy. I said, Habakkuk 2:15. So they've lost some good jobs because of that. Ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood. 1 Peter. I didn't know I was a royal priesthood, a chosen generation. The Lord sure is picking mighty low. Of course, I mean, you know, he wasn't really working with very much when he was fooling around with me. Not in those days. I'll declare he wasn't. Neither shall any priest drink wine when they enter into the inner court. Ezekiel 44:21. All right. I was going to church drinking. And that says, neither shall any priest drink wine when they enter the inner court. And just for that, it said I was a priest. And I didn't feel like a priest, and I sure didn't know much like a priest is supposed to know. And it says I wasn't supposed to drink at all when I went to church. On January the 1st, 1966, at 10 o'clock in the morning, I was up there in Washington, D.C., and a fellow that all y'all know handed me a can of beer, and I drank half of it, and I said, Dick Hoskins, you're doing the same thing all over again. So I hung it up. That's the last drink I had from that day to this. Now, the law applies to every person in here, not just me, see? That's the law on drinking. And it's cut and it's dried, and you don't add anything to it. If you're going to be a priest, and if you are Israel, you're a priest, and you're supposed to run this shebang that's going crazy outside the walls of this building. Now, this is just not known in this generation. I'll tell you. I got a little story I want to tell you. Lots of people don't go to church and anything. They know all the laws because the laws were placed in their hearts. In 1890, times were real hard up at Kelly's Ford. My middle name's Kelly, Dick Kelly, up at Kelly's Ford. And times were just real hard because commodity prices had just really dropped. And we were getting close to the bottom of the commodity cycle where you couldn't give wheat away and land wouldn't bring 10 cents an acre. Prime Virginia plantation land that sold up there close to $1,000 an acre in 1857. You couldn't give away for 10 cents in 1890. This happened time and time again in Virginia. Y'all just learning out here in the sticks. But back in Virginia, we know about these doggone cycles that come in and just wipe you out time after time. And my granddaddy had a family, and it was really hard to make a living, see? It was hard. And my granddaddy heard of a job coming up. His name was Granville Kelly. And he said, son, he said, going up there to the bank. I understand they got a job opening up. So he went up there, and he said, he came back with the information to his daddy. He says, Daddy, he said, I got the job. He says, all I got to do is for you to write a letter saying that I'm a sober, hard-working man. And Granddaddy says, well, I'm glad to do that. So he wrote his endorsement. And my granddaddy, Dick Kelly, went out and had just a couple of drinks with his friend to celebrate getting a job, because that's something to celebrate, and I can understand that. And he came home back down to Kelly's Ford, and my granddaddy, great-granddaddy, Granville, smelled beer on his breath, and he said, son, go in there and get my paper and pencil. And so he sat down and wrote a letter. Now remember, Dick Kelly had a wife and he had a family. He says, I'm real sorry to have to withdraw my recommendation of my son. He is a hard-working man, but I cannot say that he's sober. Sincerely yours, Granville Kelly. And he mailed it, and my granddaddy, Dick Kelly, didn't get the job. Had to go to Texas. But that raises another story, and I don't want to get into that right now. I have my family got into Texas and what they did there. But I'll tell you, it's worth hearing sometime. You asked me during the question and answer period about how come my mother was born in Texas, and that's a real story. I found out about another law. It says, ask and ye shall receive. Now you see, I was coming along. I want to tell you right now, my wife's reaction to all this was, well, not exactly what you would expect. You know, my wife wanted me saved, see, but not that much, you know. So, she wanted some improvements. You understand? She didn't want to overhaul, you know. And I tell you the truth, we came close to having some falling out, over this. But after a while, she got to realize that, you know, I wasn't dangerous or anything, you know. And break up stuff around the house, and it was a little bit strange, so she just leave them alone, and you get used to something like that after a while, you know, like a piece of furniture that you don't like when you first get there, but you get used to it and get used to living with it. And so we got working in this law thing, so after a while it seemed to work, especially that tithing thing, you know. That tithing thing's crazy to start off with. How can you take $1 when you can't make ends meet right now, take 10% of that, give it away, and make ends meet afterwards, huh? Now, you know that doesn't make sense, but it works. Now, I'll tell you that. And my wife, when she saw that it actually worked, and boy, we hassled over that month after month after month before we tried that. But, you know, Jerry's hot on that, see, so I had to I had to go along with the rest of the boys and try that time thing, and Jerry's right about that. You know, it honestly goodness works. And I want to tell you another little thing I learned. You're responsible where that 10% goes. And you look out and see that need out in Israel, and you put it where it helps, in Israel. And don't you let it go outside. Not as long as we got needs, and our needs are desperate right now. Okay, I ran across another law. Ask and you shall receive. Gee, I swear I tried that. Relieves tension a little bit. Didn't help a lot, didn't get much out of it, but we tried this asking and receiving, writing down, you know, what we asked for and the dates we asked for it, and if and when we ever got it answered, see? We had a list down there like that. And then when we scratch it off, you know, when we got it answered, we scratch it off, put the date. Still got some of those lists. It's the most interesting thing. We didn't have a house. We had been married forever. We had two children. That's how many we had. And I said, all right, Ann, I said, let's ask for a house. She said, how do we go about doing that? Said, I think you're supposed to close your eyes and ask for a house. So I said, you ready? She says, yes. I said, okay, here we go. Lord, give us a house. Amen. She said, amen. Done. Put it down on my list. Next day, Ann Sidner, my wife, got a phone call. She said, Dick, you know, a house that I've always wanted is coming on the market. Now, you know, that's next day. You know, that's fast. And, you know, so I went to see it. And I went to see it. It wasn't even on the market. So, and we didn't have any money. I was a salesman. I had enough money, you know, to last in case you had a bad period, like 2 or 3 weeks. You know, you're supposed to have that, but I didn't have anything extra. I didn't. And I had to have that little cushion fund, you know. And so we went to see the house. And, oh, man, it was all dark brown inside, you know. They painted dark brown and looked real gloomy. But I knew enough about houses. It looked like one of those colonial-type houses you got in Virginia with 3 dormers up, you know, in the top. And it has a floor and a half, you know. And you could just see the places for the trundle beds, those little small beds up in the alcoves, and little old small rooms up there. Just ideal for kids, and placed down there in the basement there for a workshop, you know. And I enclose this carport there in the back, make an office and a playroom and all those things. I used to be a carpenter, you know. After I got out of law school, I couldn't get a job nowhere, so I worked as a carpenter for over a year. And I got to be a pretty good carpenter, so I said, hey, you know, I think it just might do, you know. Well, what do you do after that? I wasn't sure. So we went home. Now catch this. I says, let's ask for some money. So I said, she says, yeah, let's do it the same way. Put some money. Amen. And she says, amen. All right. This is the 3rd day. We got a phone call. Now I had to have a rich Uncle Alec somewhere, tight on a tick, you know. Now Uncle Alec, he's never given me anything. I work for that man, you know, $1 an hour. That's when everybody else is getting $1.25, $1.50. I was getting $1 an hour, digging ditches. I'm his nephew. I went there swinging. Blacks would come around and get in the ditch with me, and they'd quit after 2 hours. Temperature 110, 120 in that sun. Hotter than the mischief. Talk about digging ditches. I can give you some tips on it, but that's beside the point. He called up and said, Dick, he said, I've been worried that you don't have a house to live in. He says, I've got it fixed in my will that I'm going to leave you $3,000, $4,000. But instead of leaving it to you in my will, he says, I just thought of something just came to me. He said, I thought of it to you right now. I said, thank you, okay, I sure do appreciate it. So we got the down payment on the house. I didn't know you weren't supposed to go in debt. See, now all that comes later on. But we got a house, see? All right. I had a good year in 1973. Boy, I had a good year. And I was making money like it was going out of style. I really was. That thing was coming in. You know, nobody ever told me that. I thought it was going to be this way forever. But it was, you know, but during that period of time, I was making enough money. I made enough money to pay the house off. And then the question was whether I really ought to pay the house off or not, because everybody told me that the interest was deductible. And I was only paying 5%. And if I took that money and invested it at 10%, you see, I was only paying 5%, and I got 10% on my money that I invested. I'd have a rake off. You can't beat that. And I started thinking about that. But you know, I ran across that part. It says, "Owe no man anything but love." And I says, now, I guess that means me, because all these other things mean me. So my wife advised me to go ahead and invest in this 10% investment. And the banks did, and all my best friends did. But I went ahead and paid the 5% note off, and the banker said I was crazy. I'll never forget that. He said, he looked me right in the eye, and he said, his face was straight. He wasn't even smiling. He says, you're crazy. And so I paid it off. Do you know that investment later went down so low that I couldn't have gotten my money out and couldn't have paid my house off if I had invested? And that was a blue chip investment that couldn't have failed. It couldn't have. That's how I learned about that law. Now, I ran across something else. I was a stockbroker, and I spent a lot of time buying and selling bonds, millions and millions of dollars in bonds. Then I ran across this. This is what the Bible said. Thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brother. Usury of money. Hey, this is not the Bible. This is. I copied all, out of the Bible into this book right here. Thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brother, usury of money, usury of victuals, usury of anything that is lent upon usury. Unto a stranger Zwar, racial alien, thou mayest lend upon usury, but unto thy brother thou mayest not lend upon usury. 23, 19, and 20. And then it goes on and on and on and on and on about usury. Every page I turned over in the Bible had something about usury. You know, once you get onto something, that's how it is. So I said, Jerry, I said, would you mind coming over to the office? I got a real problem. He said, sure, Dick. So those were the days when Jerry made house calls. And he came over to the office, and we sat down. And I said, now look, Jerry, it says this here, and it says this there, and it says this there. And I said, this is real important to me because I do a lot of business in bonds, usually. I said, does the Bible really mean what it says? And he says, Dick, it sure does. I said, uh-oh. Well, I got to change my ways. So I quit selling bonds, and immediately my income dropped half and half. Well, that's what it called for. 3 weeks after that, Thomas Road Baptist Church issued a series of bonds to build something. Now, really, you know, I thought if sauce for the goose was sauce for the gander. I didn't know that, you know, that it would be wrong for me to make it all right for someone else. And I didn't know that people were saved by faith and they wanted to do anytime they did want it. Now, I'm not saying Jerry's doing that, but that's what it looked like to me, see? So that upset me. I've been going to church there now for 10, 15 years, something like that, maybe 10 years or so. But that was one of the things that sort of upset me about that relationship. And then my bank was bought out by a Jewish bank. You know, all this time everybody was getting interest on their checking accounts and I couldn't. But then a Jewish bank bought out my bank, and then I could take interest from strangers. So, remember that. Then I ran across this thing about children be obedient unto your parents as the Lord. This is important. And how important, I didn't know, because I was teaching the children as I got understanding. And I got a little girl named Granville. She was my oldest daughter. And goodness knows, I had a granddaddy named Granville Kelly. And he was a mighty fine gentleman, a mighty fine Christian gentleman. I remember they came by the old Kelly's Ford there and asked him to give oath of allegiance. And he said he'd be doggone if he'd give oath of allegiance. And they threw him in jail for I don't know how long. And he never did give oath of allegiance. Turned him loose after the war was over. And I said, my first boy I'm going to name Granville. Well, it wasn't a boy who got born. It was a girl. Don't make him never mind. Her name's Granville. See, it's too good a name to waste. So I just went ahead and named her Granville. Well, she wanted to get married to this young boy there who was sang in the choir, as far as deacon, Presbyterian church. And you know, you can't hardly get. So, who are you supposed to allow your daughters to marry? Hey, daddies, let me tell you something. Who your daughter wants to marry is just absolutely unimportant. It's who you give the okay to your daughter to marry. That's important, and don't you forget it. Now here is the law in this case, and it comes from Numbers 36, 6 through 9. It says, let them marry whom they think best. Only to the family of the tribe of their father shall they marry. Okay? If you've got no objections. Now you make sure that your objections are legit and they stand, and if you can't find any objections, then go ahead and let the marriage take place. If you got an objection, you're going to be hung for letting her get hung. All right, she got married to this young fella. Oh, she didn't. She was talking about getting married. So the young man came up to me and says, Mr. Hoskins, I says, yes, sir. He says, I'd like to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. I said, well, I've talked to my daughter about this, and it looks like a very fine arrangement, and I'm very much in favor. I'd like to ask you 2 or 3 questions first before I give you my final okay. He says, yes, sir. You go right ahead. I said, all right. You're a fine young man, and you look like you're a good worker and all. And I see you got a part-time job right now. I said, now, when are you going to get a full-time job so you can support your wife? And he says, well, this part-time job, he was working in a car wash while he's going to school. He says, well, this job I got, I figured is sufficient. Well, I said, now, the Bible says, now catch this, man. Men, establish your businesses before establishing your home. That comes out of Proverbs. That's a rule, see? That's the law. I said, now, son, the law says, men, establish your businesses before establishing your home. You haven't got a business and you can't support a wife. He says, well, that's all right. My father says we can live with them. I says, well, sir, until such time as you have a job and can support a wife, I'll have to deny your request. And he says, well, and he looked at my daughter and he says, well, I don't think we can wait for that. Hey, now, this wasn't exactly the way I planned this thing right there. And I said, I don't quite understand. He says, well, I think we're going to go ahead and get married anyway. Well, now, I had a rebel here on my hand. Now, I hadn't planned on that, see. The rebels I know something about. I raised 6 of them, and besides myself. And I said, now, hey, Granville, I said, now, you know, a young girl looks at a young boy and she can't see anything wrong. And I said, sugar, I can't allow that. She said, Daddy, I love you and all like that, but I really don't know what you can do about it. So I called Jerry. Now, you know, Jerry's right about a lot of things. He's wrong about a lot of things, too. And I really didn't know how to handle that. And he's given me some good advice. I'll tell you some bad advice he's given me, but I'll tell you some good advice he's given me, too. He said, Dick, he says, if you are right in this case, don't ever back down. You right up to the wire. You stand your ground and don't back down. Okay. So I told my daughter, I says, now, you can't live with us. The father-in-law said they can live with him. All right. I said, I'm not going to give you a wedding. My father-in-law said, I'll give you a wedding. I said, I'm not going to give you away at the wedding. The future father-in-law said, the other one said, he's going to give away. So everywhere I turned, they were cutting the ground out from underneath me. And it got real difficult. And they started trying to find preachers that would agree with their stand. They couldn't even find any apostate preachers in Lynchburg who would take a stand on that, you know. So it came right down to the wire. My daughter had issued announcements. You know, she printed these announcements up and sent them out all over the countryside. Wedding gifts were pouring into the house, see? And I made it known to all and sundry I was not in favor of that thing. And it got so uncomfortable around the house, I'll declare my heart was breaking. That my daughter moved out. She went down to live with some friends in the country. And I was going to work. And I can remember just like it was yesterday. I said, I was going on to work. And it came, I ought to go to work. I ought to go on down in the country and talk to her one more time. So I said, doggone, I'm going to do it. So, you know, to keep peace, I think I'd have done most anything. But I went on down there anyway. I drove down there to Charlotte Courthouse. And I got Granville in the car, and we were driving back to Lynchburg. I said, Sugar, I says, I brought you up to obey the law. Your daddy's wrong a lot of times, but I mean you well, and I mean the very best I can, and I really would appreciate it if you would put your obedience back in the hands of your daddy. And she says, all right, Daddy. So, all of a sudden, I had her obedience back. She was not authorized to take her allegiance to me away until I gave it away. But she took it away from me, see? Okay, now she'd come back under my wing. Well, I got her back to Lynchburg and got her to town just as fast as I can with my mother. And I went to see that young buck and delivered a, goodbye letter and all. Well, that young buck, he happened to be yay tall and yay broad, see? And he came up to see me. And that was all right, because I just happened to be in the right there. But my daughter stood by it, right straight on through. 2 weeks later, he met another girl and married her. Had 2 children by her and divorced her and married again. And that could have been my wife. And the only thing that saved her is the law. It's the umbrella that we are under, and if you ever get out from under the umbrella, you're on your own. And anything can happen to you and fall into heaven and squash you like a bug, as you deserve to be squashed because you decided on your own to walk out from underneath the law. Now, we have gone through this law thing time and time again in our family, and it has always worked. Know the law. Study the law. That's the only thing that counts. All right, now, this last year, this marriage thing, now is coming all unglued all across the country. I got people this last year, a whole flock of people, come up and ask my opinion about mixed marriages. There are mixed marriages around. What should be done about it? What is the law saying about it? Well, goodness gracious sakes, there is more written on mixed marriages than anything else in the Bible I know of except maybe money. There's so much. I know I got single-spaced typewritten pages. It must be that thick, just on plain money. But on marriage, I got a computer run it, and this is just. I had to tear it off at the bottom because I only got so much room, in my suitcase. All right, now, this is what it says. Now, here's the law. Thou shalt not take a wife of the Canaanites. Mark of Cain. How many of y'all know the mark of Cain? Okay, that's 3, 4, 5. Well, I'm going to have to read the marks of Cain. But, all right. This was written in 1858 BC. That's a long time before Christ. Thou shalt not take a wife of the Canaanites, but thou shalt go to thy kindred and take a wife. Genesis 24, 3 and 4. Now look, God made all people and all races, and God doesn't hate anybody, and God's got a place for everybody. And his place is perfect and cannot be improved on. The place of Israel is to rule. God chose Israel to rule, and rule Israel shall. And if God's got to smack Israel upside the head to make him pay attention, he's going to do that, see? Now, these rules and the laws and judgments and all are for Israel. The law is in the heart of Israel. Else, if you do in any wise go back and cleave unto the remnant of these nations, even these that remain among you, and shall make marriages with them, and go into them, and they unto you, know for a certainty that they shall be snares and traps unto you. Joshua 23, 12 and 13. I'm just spotting this down because I don't have time to read it all. Now, suppose that you do have a situation where there's marriage. What do you do then? It's cut and dried. It's not open to dispute. Separation. Now it came to pass when they had heard the law that they separated from Israel all the mixed mongrel, mixed breed, multitude. Nehemiah 13:3. And the seed of Israel separated themselves from all strangers. Nekah, strange, alien, racial alien. Nehemiah 9:2. I am Yahweh, your God, which has separated you from other people. Leviticus 20:24. But I had women coming up to me this last year, lots of them, who were already married to aliens. and who had children by them. What do you do in that case? I've got one letter from a very prominent identity preacher who said the marriage should stay as it is and go ahead and live with them forever. I've got two other letters from some of these other preachers, from identity preachers, saying, well, you ought to pray over this. You know, you ought to be very careful and pray over this. Look, the girl didn't ask to be prayed over, and she didn't ask for a bunch of garbage. She wanted to know what the rules were. And the rules and the law should have been quoted. They're entitled to that. They're entitled to that. Israel is entitled to the Word of God so that Israel will know how to react and act under any circumstance. Now, here is the law. Ezra the priest stood up and said, separate yourselves from the people of the land and from the strange wives. Ezra 10, 11, and 12. Okay, we're going on. If the priest's daughter also be married to a stranger, now who's a priest? We are. All of Israel is a priest. Those who recognize the law of God is a priest. All those who do not recognize the law of God is not a priest, and I don't care if they wear a collar turned around or anything else. If they do not recognize the law of God, whether they are Israel or not, they're not a priest under those circumstances. They've got nothing to offer. But for the priest, if a priest's daughter be married, also married unto a stranger, and that stranger is Zwer, racial alien, she may not eat of an offering of the holy thing, that which has been given to God. But if the priest's daughter be a widow or divorced and have no child, and is returned unto her father's house, she shall eat of her father's meat, but there shall no stranger eat thereof. Okay, if she has no children or anything, and she returns home again after divorcing, she's welcomed home again. In the case of a child, but we are told in Nehemiah to leave the wife and children, and return to their people. Okay, now make a confession unto the Lord God of your fathers, and do his pleasure, and separate yourselves from the people of the land, and from the strange, foreign, alien wives. And then all the congregation said with a loud voice, as thou hast said, so must we do. Ezra 10, 10 through 12. And it goes on and on and on this thing. The law of God in regards to racial interbreeding is cut and dried. And I guess there's as much written on that as any other thing in the Bible. We've got a man called Gary North now. He writes a newsletter like I do. He has come out advocating racial interbreeding in one of the letters he's come out with. Well, you know, you just can't let that sit. So this next newsletter of mine, I'm going to have to answer that. You just can't let that type of stuff go around unanswered. A man who will violate one part of the law, knowingly violate one part of the law, you'll find out more times than not, he'll violate two parts, or 3 parts, or 4 parts. It's a funny thing. Once a man knowingly violates the law. Now we have a question coming up about the mark of Cain. Good Lord, here. I forgot all about that. Here. The mark of Cain. The curse. This is the curse we've already heard. Genesis 4, 9 through 15. And the Lord said unto Cain, now catch this, when thou piercest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. In other words, you're not going to find them as farmers. A fugitive and a vagabond shall there be. They're going to be moving around. That's another part of it. And the Lord shall set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. Now, they're the 2 marks. The ground won't produce with them. You don't find them as farmers very often, or almost never. I've never seen one. And they'll be moving around all the time. And this comes from 1 Adam and Eve, 7:4, 24 and 25. Then the Creator does nothing but reinforce what he said before. Then the Creator said to him, be trembling and quaking. Then Cain trembled and became terrified, and through this sign did God make him an example before all creation as a murderer of his brother. Now, do you know a group of people that's always terrified, trembling, and quaking that somebody's going to grab them and chuck them in the oven? Huh? Now, Joshua 1, 1 Joshua 31:32. Cursed be thou from the ground, which opens its mouth to receive thy brother's blood, when thou shalt till it, when thou shalt plow it up. At that time it shall be cursed. If they turn the ground up, the ground is cursed as that time. Thorns and thistles shall the ground produce, and thou shalt be moving and wandering in the earth until the day of thy death. It says the same thing in other words. Okay? Second Adam and Eve, 13:5. Cain could neither settle nor find rest in any one place, but wandered from place to place. That's exact. All Scripture reinforces one part with another. Second Adam and Eve, 12:11. Now this pertains to us. Now what is our relationship? Make no fellowship with the children of Cain, the murderer and the sinner, who killed his brother. No fellowship. You work for them, you do business with them, you trade with them, you're going to catch it. Second Adam and Eve, 13:2. For among the children of Cain was much robbery, murder, and sin. Meanwhile, Cain, ever since God had cast him off and had cursed him with trembling and terror, which it must be a terrible curse. All the time, the children of Cain are always sweating and worried that somebody is after them. They could neither find rest in any one place, but wandered from place to place. It's seldom if you find a Canaanite that stays in the same place more than just a few years, a few short years. Occasionally a generation. Sometimes 2 generations. But I've never seen one stay in the same place 3 generations. That's just my observations. And then command thy people not to hold intercourse with the children of Cain, and not to learn their ways. For I am a God who loves, not hatred, and the works of iniquity. Adam and Eve 19:4. Now, right now, we've got to break for lunch. But I want to continue this because we've got something real good starting up this afternoon. Well, whenever, it's the next time I speak. We just don't know when I'm going to speak right now. We're in a fluid